This is topic 4 and we are looking at the cattle industry, its development, its decline, and I've tagged cowboys on the end of here because I feel that is where it best fits. Now I haven't put a slide in for our 1835 to 1862 time period because there isn't really enough for you to say here, but it is just worth mentioning that whilst the American Civil War is underway, this is where the Texas Longhorn are kind of left behind to multiply. Okay, but we'll mainly be looking at the development section into the conquest section here. Okay, in our development section then, 1862 to 1876, this fits fairly nicely into 3 parts of the story, and I've split the PowerPoint up here to show you beginning, a middle and an end, should the narrative account question arise. So we begin with Goodnight Loving, and it is worth mentioning that Joseph McCoy and Goodnight Loving are very close together here. They're basically acting at the same time, but we're going to start with Goodnight Loving and their trail. So in 1866, after the Civil War has ended, in 1865, lots of soldiers have returned to their ranches back in Texas, and they've noticed that their longhorns have multiplied into the millions. Now, this is going to make a lot of very rich men because there is demand in the north for this meat, but not so much the south. So if you drive your cattle to the north or eastern markets, you're looking at $40 a head, whereas in the north they're selling for in the south they're selling for $5 a head. So, as you can imagine, lots of men rush to make it rich by getting rid of their cattle. Now, Goodnight Loving pause about this and they wonder if they can take their cattle elsewhere, perhaps not so far, and they can make a bigger profit as well. So they mark out the Goodnight Loving Trail, and this goes from Texas to Wyoming. It takes about 6 months to drive your cattle on this trail, and they are looking for those profitable markets, and they find them. They sell to the government, they sell to starving Navajo Indians at Fort Sumner, and various other homesteaders and people making it west. They get 4 times the price should they have sold them in the northern markets. So they become very rich from this. Meanwhile, they meet John Iliffe, and by 1868 they are selling their kind of excess cattle that they haven't sold to John Iliffe. They're kind of thin, and we're going to talk about what he does with those cattle a little bit later. In our middle section then, so remember the middle section, McCoy in the middle, all our M's in the middle here. Joseph McCoy, 1867. He is recognising the popularity of trails, but also the problems with the trails. They take a long time, the cattle get thin, you don't fetch a good as price for them. So he sets up the first cow town in Kansas. Now, Kansas causes a bit of a problem because when you're walking from Texas to try and get to those northern markets, you have to trample through other people's land, and Kansas put in a quarantine law because Texas fever was being spread, which was impacting their cattle. It was being spread by the Longhorn. So McCoy built his cow town near the outskirts of where the quarantine law ends, and he negotiates with the rail builders and asks them to build their railhead by his cattle town. This means he's going to have access to the railway. Why on earth would he want that? Well, that would be attractive to cattle businessmen because they can purchase their cattle, put the cattle on a train and get them to market. This means that they're not going to lose any weight. So all they have to do is bring their cattle from Texas to Kansas, not as far as going on the Goodnight Loving Trail. So he extends a trail called the Chisholm Trail, a relatively safe trail. It takes 2 to 3 months to go from Texas to Kansas via this trail. And he spends $5,000 marketing this to Texas cattlemen. So this is going to get cowboys from Texas to Abilene in good time, and once they get there, he's going to get them to spend their earnings there too. So cowboys would walk to market at Abilene and they would store their cattle in the stockyards there. He had hotels, saloons. Cowboys would spend all of their money, businessmen would do their deals, and he bought 450 acres of land to do this, to build his depot and his hotel. We know this was successful as 3 million cattle have been driven through Abilene by 1872, so it was a very popular way of doing business and people liked the safety of the railway. This develops even further with John Ilif's idea. So he's noticed that the trails cause a problem because the cattle lose weight on the trail. It's also expensive. You're bound to lose some cattle along the way and you have to pay your outfit of cowboys to deliver them to market too. He notices that there are gaps in the market in some of this New Plains land. So as Colorado becomes flooded with gold prospectors, he realises that there is no railhead there yet. So it's hard to get provisions to these miners, these prospectors. So he believes that he can raise cattle on the plains and make big profits selling to these new markets. So this is exactly what he does. He uses lots of acres of land using the Homestead Act, and he builds a huge ranch. The land is really cheap and the food is free. The graze for the cattle, obviously he doesn't have to pay anything for it, so he can fatten his cheap cattle that he's bought from Goodnight Loving for a really, really low cost to him. And he can sell to the rail builders, the Indians, the miners, gold prospectors, etc. There is no need to use trails because you are already at the market you need to be, so it takes a couple of days to get them to markets rather than months, which is relatively safe. This is so popular that he becomes Denver's first millionaire. This leads to the beef bonanza of the 1870s. So a few investors invest in this style, this model of cattle ranching, which is open range. So really cheap land, free graze, and a few men are making really, really big profit. This also makes them very, very powerful where they own these ranches. It tends to be tied to politics as well, so they become the most powerful men. So we have a boom in the cattle industry and quite a few people becoming rich here. By our conquest era, this is all starting to fall apart. So 1876 to 1895. There are quite a few problems here, including overstocking. This is where there are now too many cattle on the plains and not enough pasture. They are competing over grass, the thing that grows them nice and fat and healthy and makes them very profitable. Because there is an excess of cattle, this leads to a fall in demand, and this means that prices dive as well. There is a fall in profits for our large cattlemen here. In 1883, soil erosion has taken place and grass has withered after drought. This means that the cattle are weak because they have not had enough food. This is a huge problem by the time we get to 1886 because there is a very harsh winter with severe cold, lots of snow and temperatures of minus 55 degrees. This leads to the death of 15% of the open range herds, and this is known as the Great Die-Up. On these huge ranches, it's quite hard for cattle to be looked after. It's hard for cowboys to ride out in the snow and to make sure that the cattle are protected or sheltered. So it hits large ranches more than it hits the smaller ranches. After this winter, it is the end of huge ranches. Small ranches become the model because cattle can be kept a closer eye on, they can be looked after a little bit better, and also there is a change to a focus instead of on quantity but on quality. They start to breed better quality meat such as Holsteins and Herefords. This leads to better prices for small ranchers, and this is truly the end of the huge model of ranching. On to cowboys now then too. So the ones in the orange here are our middle section, and our red colour here is going to be our conquest section at the end. So there is a change in the lifestyle and the work of cowboys as ranches change. So we're going to have a look at that change now. Cowboys that are on the Texas ranches, the original ones in the 1860s and 1870s, have quite insecure employment here. It tends to be seasonal. Cowboys are hired when you need them for the spring roundup and when you need to walk the cattle to markets. So it's an insecure income. They tend to have other jobs as well. They live in a bunkhouse, which is not all that comfortable. They live in a room with other men, and there could be quite strict rules, including no gambling. It's just not that comfortable. Some of their jobs include riding out to check on cattle. They get involved with the spring roundup where they divide the calves between them, and then they have to walk thousands of miles to get the cattle to market. There could be 3,000 cattle on a drive, and they are looked after by about 12 cowboys, and there's various different jobs. So you've got the wrangler, you've got the cook, and cowboys get paid about $25 for making this journey, and the boss gets about $100. They sleep out in the open. They are at risk of attack from wild animals or maybe some hostile Indians, bandits as well that are there to steal the cattle, and there is the risk of stampede if the cattle get spooked. When we get to open plains ranches, the job changes a little bit. They do still get involved with the spring roundups. However, the driving the cattle to market only takes a few days rather than weeks. Winter is a new problem though, because the winters in Texas are nowhere near as harsh as they are on the plains. We've got heavy snow, we've got cattle that are getting into distress. Cowboys need to ride out and break the ice so the cattle can drink water or dig them out if they've got trapped. And sometimes they are sent to live in little kind of bunkhouses on the plains. They're not together in big groups and often on their own. It can be quite isolating, and they are not paid all that well. In terms of our conquest era, there are far less demand for cowboys after the big ranches are no longer the model anymore. The model is now keeping smaller herds, so there's less need for cowboys along this way. Cowboys' work includes branding and dehorning the cattle, looking after horses and calves, mending barbed wire fences, and harvesting hay for winter. They still do the spring roundup, but barbed wire fencing makes it a little bit easier to identify whose cattle belong to who. They live in bunkhouses, not all that comfortable. They've got lice, thin walls, and there are still strict rules to follow. They are responsible for riding the line. They are patrolling these fences to make sure that cattle haven't escaped. Nobody's cut the wire to steal cattle, so it's a big change here.